All right, so get this. Today we are diving into the law of attraction,
Okay.
but like with a twist.
Mm.
We're looking at it through the lens of Islam.
No lens in Islam, yeah.
We found this YouTube video.
Okay.
It's from this channel called Mulvi with an Attitude.
Interesting name.
And it's these three Muslim scholars, Raja Zia ul Haq, Omar, and Karam.
Okay.
And they're having like a really deep discussion about how the law of attraction kind of fits in or doesn't fit in with Islamic teachings.
Fascinating. It's not every day you see those two worlds collide.
Right. Like you've got this super popular self-help concept, and then
Yeah.
you're analyzing it from like a completely different perspective.
Totally. And it really highlights how these ideas that we might think of as modern or secular often have roots in much older traditions.
Hmm.
So before we get too deep into the Islamic take on this, maybe we should back up a bit.
Yeah, good idea.
Can you give us a quick rundown on like where the law of attraction even comes from, like historically speaking?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know it's become super popular in recent years, but like it didn't just appear out of thin air, right?
No, definitely not. So the law of attraction as we know it today, it really gained traction during the Enlightenment period.
Oh, okay.
Think like reason, individualism, that whole shift away from traditional religious authority.
Right. So it was kind of a reaction to that, right? Like, hey, if organized religion isn't cutting it anymore, maybe we can manifest our own destinies.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. It definitely tapped into that human desire for control, for agency, for, shaping your own reality.
Yeah, I can see how that would be appealing, especially in a time of so much change, socially and intellectually.
Absolutely. And, that desire for self-improvement, for shaping our lives, it didn't just disappear, right? So even as traditional beliefs shifted, that urge to connect with something bigger than ourselves, it remained.
Makes sense. And I guess that's where figures like Deepak Chopra come in. Like they kind of bridge that gap, right?
Yeah.
Blending Eastern and Western spiritual ideas into this whole self-help movement.
Yeah, you could say that. And the law of attraction, it's a big part of that movement. It's still got a huge following.
It does. It's everywhere. Books, podcasts, workshops, you name it.
And, on the surface, it sounds pretty good, right? Think positive thoughts, attract positive outcomes. But the scholars in this video, they really challenge that overly simplistic view.
Yeah, they don't waste any time getting to like the heart of the matter. They highlight this major difference between the law of attraction and Islamic teachings, the concept of Allah's ultimate will. Like that's a big one, right?
Huge. In Islam, there's this deep belief that there's a divine plan, a preordained path. And that path, it's not always going to be easy. It often includes challenges, trials, and tribulations, even for the most righteous individuals.
And they bring up the Prophet Muhammad's life as like the perfect example of that.
Exactly. I mean, here you have the most beloved of Allah's messengers, and even he faced immense hardship and loss. It's not to say that Islam is all about negativity and suffering, but it definitely challenges that whole think positive and everything will be perfect mentality.
Yeah, it really puts things into perspective. Like if just thinking positive thoughts could guarantee a smooth and problem-free life, well, then someone like Prophet Muhammad wouldn't have had to go through what he did.
Right. So it's a really powerful point they're making there.
So it's not like Islam is against positivity, right?
Not at all. They're very clear about the benefits of a positive attitude and mindset. It's more about, I guess you could say, making a distinction between a healthy, optimistic outlook and the kind of magical thinking that often gets attached to the law of attraction.
Okay, so it's less about like just visualize it and it'll magically appear and more about what? Just wishful thinking?
No, it's not about wishful thinking at all. It's about recognizing that our thoughts have power, but not in some kind of supernatural sense.
So where did that power come from then?
Well, think about it like this. Have you heard of neuroplasticity?
I think so, but remind me.
It's the idea that our brains are constantly changing and adapting based on our experiences and, yeah, our thoughts.
Oh, okay. So it's like our thoughts literally shape our brains.
Yeah,
Which then influences how we act and behave.
precisely. And that has real-world implications. The scholars actually bring up the example of, Mohamed Salah, the soccer player.
Oh, yeah, yeah. He's incredible. I've heard he's really into visualization techniques, right?
He is. Like, he'll visualize himself making certain plays, scoring goals, all that. But it's not about manifesting those wins, if you know what I mean.
Right. It's more like mental rehearsal, like practicing a skill, but in your mind.
Exactly. He's training his mind, building confidence, getting into that optimal mental state for performance.
That's really interesting. So it's like, just as you'd practice physical skills, you can practice mental ones too.
Exactly. And that's where the power of positive thinking, when it's grounded in reality, can be so beneficial. But the scholars are also careful to point out that a mindset shift alone isn't enough.
Right. Like you can't just sit on the couch visualizing success and expect it to fall into your lap.
That's what they're saying. They tie this back to the Islamic emphasis on action, on effort. There's this beautiful analogy in the video. They say it's like a bird, you know. It doesn't just sit in its nest waiting for food to show up. It goes out and actively searches for sustenance.
That's a great analogy. And prayer or dua plays a role here too, right? It's not just passive wishing. It's about actively seeking guidance and support from Allah.
Absolutely. And the scholars really emphasize the importance of aligning our desires with our actions. Like, are we actually putting in the work? Are we making an effort? They even bring up the story of Nuh, you know, Noah, who preached for 950 years with, honestly, very limited success.
Wow, 950 years. That's commitment.
It is. It's a powerful example of perseverance, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. And it's something for all of us to consider, right? Are we putting in the effort alongside our hopes and prayers? Are we taking concrete steps to actually achieve what we desire?
That's a great question for our listeners to reflect on for sure.
Definitely. And, you know, while a positive mindset is obviously super helpful, there's also a danger in going to the extreme with it. Like, the good vibes only approach can backfire sometimes.
Especially in situations that call for critical thinking and like a healthy dose of realism.
Exactly. They give this great example of, like, a business owner who gives up after just 2 failed attempts.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
And they use that example to highlight how important it is to be persistent, to adapt, and to actually learn from your mistakes.
Right, because failure is often just a stepping stone to success, right? Like, think about Thomas Edison and how many times he had to try before he finally perfected the light bulb.
It's like if he'd given up after a couple of tries, we might still be living in the dark ages. It's those setbacks that often teach us the most valuable lessons.
Couldn't agree more. So we've talked a lot about action, about effort, but what about manifestation? How does that whole concept, play out in Islam?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because it seems like that's the part of the law of attraction that people get really hung up on,
Mm,
right? Like, how do you actually manifest your desires?
for sure. And that's where the concept of dua, or supplication, comes in.
Okay, so tell me more about that.
Dua is this incredibly powerful form of communication with Allah, where we express our needs, our hopes, our aspirations, everything.
And is it like just about getting what we want?
Not necessarily. The scholars actually break down 3 potential outcomes of dua, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So the first outcome is obviously the one we usually hope for immediate fulfillment. Allah grants us exactly what we've asked for.
Right, like wish granted.
Exactly. But then there's the second outcome.
Okay, what's that?
It's the prevention of calamity. So sometimes we make dua for something, and while it may not manifest in the way we thought it would, Allah protects us from something bad, some hardship we weren't even aware of.
Oh, wow. That's deep.
Ah.
So it's like our prayers are answered, but not in the way we expected.
Right. There's a wisdom at play that we might not fully grasp in the moment. And then there's the third outcome, which is perhaps the most profound.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What's the third outcome?
It's the idea that our dua is banked as reward in the afterlife.
Whoa.
Yeah. So even if we don't see a tangible result in this world, those sincere supplications, they hold immense value in the hereafter.
Wow. That's really beautiful. It's like a reminder that our connection with Allah goes beyond this earthly life.
It does. And it can be so comforting, especially when we're dealing with unanswered prayers or desires that seem, out of reach. It encourages us to trust in Allah's plan and to recognize that even our unmet needs can lead to blessings in ways we might not immediately understand.
I love that perspective. It's like surrendering to something bigger than ourselves while still maintaining that active connection through dua. And, speaking of connecting with something bigger, this video also touches on a concept that's become really popular in like New Age circles, the magic hour.
Oh, yeah. They talk about the time between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. being especially potent for manifestation, which is, well, it's kind of funny because
As it unintentionally aligns perfectly with tahajjud.
exactly, you've got this secular idea that's unknowingly tapping into this ancient Islamic practice.
That's wild. Like people are chasing after this trendy magic hour for manifestation without realizing they're basically aligning themselves with an established tradition of night prayer.
It's incredible, isn't it? And it makes you think about the depth and wisdom that's embedded within faith traditions. It's like an invitation to look beyond the surface level of these modern trends and explore the deeper meanings behind them.
So maybe those who are drawn to things like the magic hour might actually benefit from exploring practices like tahajjud, even outside of a strictly religious context.
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it? Because that time between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., it's often characterized by stillness and quiet. Like, distractions are minimal, our minds are more receptive.
It seems like the perfect time for introspection, meditation, or connecting with a sense of something greater than ourselves. Whether it's through prayer or just quiet contemplation, intentionally creating space during those hours could be a powerful practice.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound answers and insights can be found in traditions that have stood the test of time.
So those three outcomes of dua, you were just starting to explain that.
Right, right. It really flips the script on that whole ask and you shall receive thing that's so common with like manifestation and the law of attraction.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, the first outcome is the obvious one. Allah just grants you exactly what you asked for.
Right. Immediate fulfillment,
Yeah.
boom, you get what you wanted.
That's what we're all hoping for, right? But the other
Yeah.
two outcomes, what were they again?
So the second one is the prevention of calamity.
Hmm.
Like sometimes we ask for something and maybe we don't get it the way we thought we would, but Allah ends up protecting us from some harm or difficulty that we didn't even know was coming.
It's like those prayers that are answered, but not in the way you expected.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
there's this deeper wisdom at work that we might not fully understand at the time.
It's like trust the process, kind of.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And then the third outcome is it's maybe the most profound one.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's the idea that our dua is like banked as a reward in the afterlife.
Whoa.
So even if we don't see a tangible result here and now in this life, our sincere supplications, they still have this immense value, but in the hereafter.
Wow. That really is a different way of thinking about it.
It is, isn't it? It kind of takes the pressure off a little, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good reminder that our connection with Allah, it's not limited to just this earthly life.
It's bigger than that.
So much bigger. Okay, so this video, it also talks about this idea of a magic hour, which has become, kind of trendy in like new age circles and stuff.
Oh, yeah, right. They talk about how the time between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. is supposed to be like super potent for manifestation and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so funny because totally by accident, it lines up perfectly with the tahajjud.
Right. Like it's the exact same time period.
Kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. You have people chasing this like trendy self-help thing
Right.
without realizing they're basically aligning themselves with this ancient practice of night prayer.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like about the depth and wisdom that are embedded within these faith traditions. Maybe we should all be looking a little deeper at some of these modern trends and trying to see, what's really going on beneath the surface.
Maybe some of those folks who are drawn to things like the magic hour, maybe they'd get something out of exploring practices like tahajjud, even if they're not, approaching it from a strictly religious perspective.
It's an interesting thought for sure, because that time between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., it really is special. It's usually so still and quiet, fewer distractions, our minds are more receptive. It's just different.
It feels like the perfect time for introspection or meditation or just connecting with something larger than yourself.
Totally.
Whether you're doing it through prayer or just sitting in quiet contemplation, intentionally carving out time in those early hours could be a really powerful practice.
I think so too. Sometimes the best answers come from, the things that have been around for centuries, like the wisdom of those traditions. It's pretty hard to beat.
It really feels like we uncovered like a whole other layer to this law of attraction thing.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at it through the lens of Islam definitely adds a whole new dimension to the conversation.
For sure. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all of this? Like, what do you really hope they walk away with?
I think for me, it goes back to that idea of balance that the scholars kept talking about. It's not about, blindly accepting the law of attraction as this magical force, but it's also not about dismissing the power of a positive mindset either.
Yeah, it's about finding that sweet spot in the middle, right? Where your intentions and your actions are aligned, you have faith, but you're also putting in the effort.
Exactly. It's about understanding how those things work together. They
Right.
talked about how it's not just passively wishing for things to happen, but actively shaping your reality.
It's kind of like that saying, pray like it all depends on God, but work like it all depends on you. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. It's a great way to put it. What about you? Was there anything that really stood out to you from this whole discussion?
Honestly, I was really struck by their explanation of the three possible outcomes of dua.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a reassuring thought that even when our prayers aren't answered in the way we expect, they still have value. Sometimes it's about being protected from something we can't even see, and sometimes it's about blessings that are waiting for us in the next life.
Yeah. It encourages us to have faith in a bigger plan, even when we don't fully understand it.
And I keep thinking about that connection between the magic hour and tahajjud. It just blows my mind that people are out there chasing this trendy self-help concept, and they don't even realize that they're like accidentally aligning themselves with this centuries-old practice of night prayer.
Right. It's wild. It really makes you wonder what other wisdom is hidden within these traditions that have stood the test of time.
Maybe we should all be looking a little deeper at some of these so-called modern trends.
I agree. There might be more to them than meets the eye.
This whole deep dive has been such a good reminder to keep questioning, to be open to new perspectives, and to always look beyond the surface. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface here, but it's been an incredibly thought-provoking exploration.
It really has.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you'd want our listeners to take away from this conversation about the law of attraction from an Islamic perspective?
I hope it inspires them to approach personal growth with a sense of balance, to recognize the power they have to shape their own reality through their intentions, their actions, and their faith, and to remember that true fulfillment, it doesn't come from chasing quick fixes or magic solutions. It comes from embracing the journey of personal growth with an open heart and a willingness to, you know, learn and evolve.
I love that. It's about finding that balance between striving and surrendering, between putting in the effort and having faith that things will work out in the end. And you know what? Whether you find inspiration in ancient wisdom and modern trends or somewhere in between, the important thing is to find what resonates with you and empowers you to live a more meaningful life. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.